Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Transportation Committee for Wednesday, April 3rd. This is our second committee meeting of this term of council. Are there any declarations of interest? No. None? Thank you very much. We do have regrets from Councillor Fleury. We have confirmation of the minutes from 1st of March 2019. Carried. Thank you. We have communications. There are 3 items in response to inquiries. Received? Received. Thank you very much. Item number 1 is the parking cycle study and pilot project. He doesn't want to speak anymore? Okay. Councillor Hubley, I think, has a very, very quick question on this. Would you like to hold it? Okay, we'll hold it for Councillor Deans. Item number 2, we have a presentation from staff. Item number 3, there is a presentation from staff. Item number 4 is the Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Work Plan for 2019. Any questions? No? So the Transportation Committee received Part 6 of this report. Is this received? Received. Thank you. We do have a staff presentation on the item number 5. Item number 6 is property acquisition for future Fernbank Park and Ride. Is this carried? Perfect. Item number 7 is the councillor's item. Did you want to speak to this, councillor? So item number 7 is a speed reduction on Central Park. Any questions? No, is this carried? Carried. Thank you. And then we've got councillor's items and some additions to the agenda after that. Yeah, I believe Councillor Cavanaugh wants to speak to that, right? So we'll hold that. Okay, so going back to item number 1, Park and Cycle Study Pilot Project. Pardon me? So there's no staff presentation, I don't believe, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'm totally good with this pilot project. It just seems to me that it's a little costly for a 3-year pilot project for 10 parking spots when we already have them, like we already own those 10 parking spots. So since it's a pilot, I was just sort of imagining ways that we might not have to initiate a zoning change, which is costly and using staff time. So I was just wondering if we could not maybe just give passes to people that were interested in piloting this for 3 years. Anybody that wanted to use them, maybe you issue 30, 40 passes, whatever you think people are going to want. And then, of course, it would just be first come, first served basis, but it would just save the taxpayers $11,000. I just don't know why we need to spend that money. If we could achieve the same result piloting this using the existing 10 parking spots and not initiating a zoning change. Because if we decide that this isn't where we want to go, then we've already done the zoning change and spent the money.
Through you, Chair. The parking spots are there definitely. We have to change some of the parking signs, and some of that cost is for staff time to monitor this pilot program. The zoning change itself, I don't think it's that onerous, but it's an opportunity for the rest of the city, the public to know if this change is happening. To give out passes, there's a cost to that as well, and there's the cost to monitor that. I think $11,000 is just an estimate of the internal cost that would take effect if this pilot project were to proceed.
So in your estimation, initiating the zoning change and going through that process would not be any more costly than just issuing some sort of passes.
I believe that's correct, and because with the passes, how many would you have to distribute?
Yeah, I think you would just distribute them to anyone who had an interest in it, and then it would just be first come, first serve. I mean, I think it would achieve the same thing. I don't know how much a zoning change costs. I know from my own constituents, anyone that's had to initiate a zoning change comes with a price tag, and I just wondered if there was a way of saving the taxpayers that amount of money, that's all. But if you're telling me no, then fine.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's along the same lines. When I read the report, I'm wondering why we can't just do this year. This was a question that was raised last year by Councillor Wilkinson. And my thought to this was we're almost creating a bureaucratic process here. Why do the people need passes? Can we just not sign 10 spots or whatever, and it's first come, first serve, and they get in there? As soon as you start doing passes, it puts me in mind of the Gold Pass program with OC Transpo, which works very well, but people pay for those passes. And I'm not so sure people want to pay for a pass to leave their car somewhere so they can bike to work. So I'm just wondering, as a pilot, can we not just do this without the passes and just sign so many spots and let it run that way and see what the demand is?
Councillor, we're not proposing any passes. It would just be signed first come, first serve. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible for the users and to keep the process of implementing this pilot project as simple and inexpensive as possible.
So can we do it this year?
Part of the timing is the rezoning, and that has a timeline that has to be followed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any other questions on item number 1? Perfect. Is item number 1 carried? Carried. Carried. Thank you very much. And members of the committee, before we move on to the next item, there are 3 items that we want to add to the agenda, and just in case there are people who may want to speak to them from the public, I'd like to add those to the agenda now. We'll deal with them at the end, if that's okay. And so there's a motion from myself relating to winter maintenance. There's a motion from Councillor Leeper relating to bike share and scooters. And there's a motion from Councillor Menard relating to bicycle parking. And so be resolved that the Transportation Committee approve the addition of these items for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the procedure bylaw to expedite the process of reviewing these items. Is that carried? Carried, perfect. So we'll deal with those 3 items at the end of the agenda.
There's the staff here to answer some of those motions.
There are, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. So the next item is item number 2, enhancements to the temporary traffic calming measures program. Good morning. Good morning.
Hello. I'm just going to provide a brief presentation on the enhancements to the temporary traffic calming program that started in the last term of council and that has been funded going forward. This program and its enhancements will allow us to continue to install and implement many of the same temporary traffic calming measures that were installed during the last term of council, as well as a few additional items going forward. We'll continue to be able to install the speed display boards. These are boards that are installed at the side of the roadway to notify drivers of the speed at which they're driving. It also provides some feedback, or has the opportunity to provide some feedback related to the speed they're operating and the appropriate speed. So we typically use pictograms, smiley faces, or unhappy faces to provide some additional information. We have a series of pavement markings that we can continue to implement through the program. We have school zone ones, stop ahead ones to help with stop compliance, speed limit signs, the school area thermoplastic signage, pavement markings as well, slow down pavement markings. The flexible centerline signage, flex stakes, commonly referred to as flex stakes. Those are signs that are placed on the center line of a roadway to help provide some friction, side friction, so when drivers pass them, they feel a little bit uncomfortable and slow their speeds. We have the cycling delineators, which also provide that same sort of side friction, but also provide somewhat separated facility for cyclists along the corridor where we have bike lanes. The next item is the community entrance signage. These are typically placed at the entrance to a community to notify motorists that they are entering into a community and ask them respectfully to make sure their driving is appropriate for that community. The slow down for us signs provide a similar type of notification to motorists. These are mostly placed in residential areas to let drivers know that there's the potential for children or other road users in the vicinity. Then we have the planters, which we've used to create chicanes along the roadway. These are physical measures that will help reduce the speed along the corridor. Flexible posts have also been used in one application previously to provide chicanes or bulb outs, also a narrowing and side friction to help drivers slow down. There is the implementation of warranted pedestrian crossovers that are not able to be funded through the pedestrian crossover program. Minor roadway modifications, usually widening of shoulders or that sort of thing in the rural areas. Gateway signage. This is one of the new measures that we're introducing this year as part of the temporary traffic calming program. Last year, Council approved a report to allow the usage of this sort of signage, the gateway signage, to implement speed limit changes within residential areas. The funding for it is limited under our existing operating budget, and so this provides an opportunity for councillors to implement this more quickly than under our operating budget. We're also introducing permanent speed humps or tables. These will work with road services and their contractors to implement these. Median narrowings as well, or pedestrian refuge islands. Also, we'll be working with road services to implement these going forward. A summary of the implementation that was undertaken over the last term of council shows close to 1,600 locations implemented through this program during that time. Large amount of flex stake locations, pavement marking locations, and permanent speed display boards. That sums it up.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We have, I do have a speakers list if people are interested. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions for you. The paint signs that you're showing that I think work on the street, I think we're getting good results with it. The question I have with it is the quality of the paint. Like I had some painted late summer, early fall, and now your staff are telling me I have to repaint them. So that cost is going to add up as we get more and more locations. So I'm just wondering what we're doing about trying to find a better quality paint.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're going to be bringing forward a report next month in terms of the pavement marking and the paint that we apply on our roads. Depending on when the paint is applied, the durability and also the type of road. So if you're on a busier road like a collector, then we'd expect that the paint will need to get refreshed quicker than if you're on a local residential street where the traffic's not as much. So there's some different things that we can look at doing to try to fix that, and we'll bring that forward at the next committee meeting.
So that'll be at this committee next month, okay? My second question for you is other ideas, like the stuff that you've got there, as Phil knows, I was one of the early adopters of a lot of that stuff 6 years ago. The thing that I'm noticing though is when they're out there for a while, they tend to lose their effect. So I think we have to keep coming up with fresh ideas because it's the something new. For example, the what do you call the things you put on the side of the road where last year you came out with one that looks like a real child and it says slow down, those ones. Like anything new like that seems to have a much better impact than what you used before. So I'm wondering what your program is to try to rotate through your items and add new things on a regular basis.
We'll continue to review and add new items as they become available. Last year and over the last couple of years, we piloted the silhouettes, as you mentioned in your ward, as well as some 3D speed humps. So we will continue to look at opportunities, every opportunity that's available to us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's probably one of the favorite topics in my ward is traffic calming, and everybody wants it. And I tend to have a very long list. I want to know what the backlog looks like in terms of right now of requests, because you've talked about how many are out there, but what kind of backlog do we have in terms of people that still, or neighborhoods that still want, that are on waiting lists?
We typically don't have a backlog in our temporary traffic calming program. We work with the councillors to determine which locations they want to prioritize for a given year based on the given funding. So we typically don't have a backlog within our program.
But there's a lot of programs we still can't put in because there isn't enough money. So maybe you don't keep a list of it, but I can tell you that there definitely is a backlog of places that we don't get to because there's not enough funding. You're not keeping track of those?
Well, with the temporary traffic calming, we work with the councillors to identify the locations, and to date we haven't found that backlog specific to this program. Maybe we can sit down if you want to review the locations in your ward, and we'll come up with a plan. We do work with the councillors. We do collect traffic data. If there's a requirement to install measures, and we can see what the operating speeds are to sort of prioritize, okay, which is sort of the ones that seem to be based on the data that you want to move forward with. But at this point, we're not aware of any backlog, but I'd be happy to sit down with you to review the locations in your ward.
Well, we do have the councillor budget that just got bumped up a little bit, but I feel, people wonder, like, why is there a separate budget, city budget, and then that councillor budget? It sort of feels like Peter and Paul, like it's the same. Is it the same kind of requests? What is the difference?
Well, I believe you're talking about the area traffic management program, and that's a project, and I think there's a report coming, a presentation on that, the next item. Yeah. Our program here is meant to be more short-term fixes, so it's not doing big studies in terms to see what the impacts of the measures will be. It's more to say I've got a problem on this street with speeding or other things, and we can put something in very quickly. And so for that specific program, the temporary traffic calming program that utilizes the $50,000 for each councillor, we don't have that backlog, but again, I'd be happy to sit down with you to review those locations in your ward.
So, but why is it separated that way in terms of one being for councillors and another one that's citywide?
Well, Councillor, this was a policy decision that Council made 5 or 6 years ago so that there could be a quick response to emerging community needs without having to go through the bureaucracy and red tape of studies, because councillors, I think the view is that councillors know their neighborhoods better than anyone else, and these measures can typically be deployed much faster.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for answering on behalf of staff.
It's 2 different groups of staff that work on this, and so given that the people responsible for the program you care about isn't at the table, that's why we did that. Councillor Alchantier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for the presentation and also meeting with us prior to today's committee. One question, Krista, on slide 10, when you talk about the minor road deficiency improvement in the rural area, and I think that applied to a lot of roads in our area. Problem is, are we still allowed to use that funding allocated for council to do that? Because the last time we had to get a special exemption from council to allow use some of that funding to be able to do the pavement there. Are we still allowed to use some of that money we have to do paving those deficiencies?
Typically, you're allowed to fund this type of an initiative through the temporary traffic calming program if it's related to a traffic calming situation as well. So we would usually do the improvements in order to help facilitate the installation of signage or other temporary traffic calming items.
I'm asking about this because everything will improve traffic, let's be honest, because when the road is narrowed down, that's not safety for traffic, and especially for if we have a bicycle on a shoulder as well. And sometimes we use some of our funding to close that gap where bicycle lane can lead you to a park and ride or on other transit. So my question to you, in the past, we were not allowed to use that money without coming to council for exemption. Is this still available to be used?
Yeah, and the report, the report we did back in 2015 talked about this, and similar to this, it's carried over. So it's meant to do some very small enhancements, like you mentioned, from a cycle, to fill in that gap in the road. So that would still be permitted through this program, as it was in the last term of council. That hasn't changed.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Eglai. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Phil, one of the things that really catches my attention is you explained it's a temporary traffic calming measure, and then we're talking about speed humps and tables. So I'm having trouble figuring out how that's a temporary. Once it's there, it's there. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have a city process for the removal of speed humps or tables. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And so there's going to be a process in terms of before you put them in, we're going to want to do some consultations. So we would recommend doing a petition process for that street so they understand that when this type of device is going in. It was sort of comments we've received back from councillors and residents in terms of, is there other low-cost type of solutions that may be more permanent? So we've got the speed humps as one example. We also have the medians. These are measures that won't impact drainage, because once you start impacting drainage, then they become higher cost. So we've had situations in the past where we've had a wide road. We'd like to put a concrete median to try to narrow the road to provide a pedestrian refuge, and these would be opportunities to put those measures in. So the speed humps, again, we'd want to make sure that there's an issue, so we would collect data. We'd work with the ward councillor to determine, is it something that you want to do? We can look in terms of prioritization, and it'll be up to the council to decide if they want to go that route or if they want to continue with the more temporary, like flex stakes or the chicanes or other things. So we'll work with the councillor on that.
So to follow up, you said more low cost. You and I have talked about this a lot over the years. Can you maybe share just how much a speed hump or table might cost? And also, it's my understanding it would be a rare occurrence that a single one would do the job. So you're looking at 2 or 3 going in. So can you give us a sense of what that kind of cost might be?
So at this point, the cost we see for these that we're installing is between $5,000 and $7,000 to $8,000 per location. So in terms of the numbers, that does become a challenge if you've got a very long street. So we would need to work with the councillor. And maybe that this, the council decides that this might be sort of the last solution. You've tried other temporary things and we don't see the reduction in speeds. But what we found with all the other measures that we've implemented, they tend to be very well in reducing speeds in terms of the measures that we implement. So again, it's working with the council to decide. Some councillors may want to use them, others may not, but it's at the purview of the council, the councillor to decide.
And then the last question on this part of the report is, again, when we've talked about this in the past at this committee and at council, one of the big issues has been emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, you know, and the impact that a speed table or a hump can have on response time. So where are emergency services on this particular initiative, or how have we addressed their concerns?
Yeah, so these would only be put on local residential streets, so we wouldn't see them on collectors, at least through this program, nor arterials. It's basically meant to be just a low volume roadway, more residential street that people feel they have speeding concerns on. But before we were to implement that, we would consult with fire. It won't be on any bus routes. And so we'll consult with fire, transit, as well as others to make sure, and roads, to make sure that there's no issues. Assuming there's no issues, then we could proceed. If there are, then we would sit down with the councillor and go over those things. And if it's a showstopper, look at potential other options in terms of trying to deal with the issue that's at hand.
Okay, and another question, not about the speed humps, but sort of builds on a little bit what Councillor Hughley raised about these initiatives kind of lose their gloss. One of the things I think that is effective is when a new speed calming initiative or traffic calming initiative goes in, that there's enforcement to follow. So was that contemplated in this? Do we have a system now where we can say to OPS, we're putting up a new speed board at this corner on this street or chicanes or whatever, we'd like you out there for the next couple of days to monitor, hand out tickets if necessary, or even give warnings to people, you know, part of a sort of an educational outreach. Do we have that in place? And if we don't have that in place, is that direction that you can take today to go off and have a discussion with OPS to try and put some sort of process in place?
We don't have that in place today. What we do though is with the speed boards, we provide them all the information. They receive complaints, they look at all the data, so all the speed data that we do collect in the city they have access to, and then it allows them to do some proactive enforcement based on the complaints they get. In terms of being proactive when we put measures in, that's something that we can take away and work with police to see if that's feasible.
Yeah, I just think it would be helpful because it would reinforce the new initiative, and you know, there'd be education, but there also would be the sense that there's an impact if you continue to speed. So if you can take that away and have that discussion with them, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think I had a lot of the same thought processes that Councillor Aguilar had in terms of this being a temporary program or a seasonal program to calm traffic on residential streets, and yet, the existing program, there's two things about it that I've concerned myself with. One, that there's no evaluation or analysis of how those measures did in terms of meeting their objectives of slowing the traffic, and also did they create any safety concerns in those neighborhoods. Certainly the flex stakes, the center flex stakes, work better on some streets than they do on another, but there's never any follow-up at the end of the season before they're taken out with the neighborhood to see if they want them to be put back in, or if they think they were effective, or if they think they created more hazards than they solved. So I think the program would benefit from some evaluation or analysis at the end of the season before those are taken out. And I did have a conversation with the mayor before the budget about putting new tools in the toolkit, because I think after a while, even those speed display signs, people just get so used to them, and they're ubiquitous now. So they're easier to ignore. So I did think that we needed to refresh the toolkit and have more measures. But like Councillor Aguilar, I'm not sure that what's being proposed, the speed tables and the center medians, are actually temporary. They look more permanent to me than temporary. And I know, even through the area traffic management studies that we have done and where we've implemented speed tables, that it's a mixed bag too. Yes, they maybe address some slowing of traffic as temporary, like they slow down to go over the hump and then they gun it to make up the time they lost. But it actually it's not necessarily always well received by the people that live on the street, because they don't want them in front of their house. They don't want the additional greenhouse gas emissions from people gunning it after, and they're not necessarily loved everywhere. And I'm not sure that the public is going to necessarily love them popping up like daisies in the springtime either through this program. So I don't know what I think about that. I mean, why did we choose that? I was kind of hoping we would go with the more temporary ones like they have at Lansdowne Park, that you screw them into the road and then you take them out at the end of the season so they don't get in the way of winter operations, and they're kind of more temporary. So why are we going with something that seems more like an ATM measure than it does a temporary traffic calming measure?
So I'm going to answer your last question first, and then maybe Krista can talk about the evaluation we do. In terms of the example you gave, we did pilot that a few years ago, where we put in the temporary speed humps, and what we found is because you have to nail into the asphalt, I think for one block it was a couple hundred nails into that. When you take it out in the fall, it creates a whole bunch of holes in the asphalt. We do fill it up with epoxy, but the following year with water getting through, it just starts to crack up the road. So it would mean that your road infrastructure would start to fail a lot faster than if you don't do anything. So when we did pilot that and we did see that occurring, the only time we would allow it moving forward is if we knew the road was getting resurfaced. So I know that we tried one last year in Stittsville where we knew the road was getting resurfaced, so and the residents weren't too sure if they wanted to have the speed hump, because as you mentioned, some people love them, but the people that live there don't necessarily like them. Mm-hmm. So they piloted, so we were able to put that there. There was consensus on the street that they thought it should be there, so when the reconstruction came in and the resurfacing, they put them in permanently. This was added as a tool in terms of another option to do. It's not to say something that a councillor has to do. At the end of the day, this whole program is up to the councillor to decide. Some councillors may say, you know what, I want to try putting in some in. Other councillors may say, we don't want to do it. So this doesn't say you need to do it. This just says this is another option or another tool in your toolbox that you might want to consider using based on that street. So maybe I'll let Krista talk about the evaluation question.
We have done some evaluation of the measures that we've implemented through the last term of council. We did a lot of before and after studies to determine the effectiveness of the measures, so we do have some information on that. We can provide that to you if you like.
Did you do any in my ward?
Yes, we should have. We were targeting every location for implementation.
And how did you do the evaluation?
We used ATR tubes to collect speed and volume data before and after implementation, so we can compare the reduction in speed and increase in compliance if there was any after implementation. For all new measures that we will be piloting, like the 3D speed hump we did last year, or the silhouettes, we will continue to do that, that form of data collection. And we are doing a comprehensive review right now of all of the speed board data. We should finish that by the end of the year.
Okay, well, I actually think that's really good. I mean, these are measures that are intended to slow traffic or create awareness of the driver's driving habits. And to that end, I think, that's doing what you want it to do. But I think the evaluation perhaps needs to go a little further than that, because all members of council, I'm sure it's not just me, get lots of feedback from the residents in the area about the impact, especially those flex stakes. Some see them like they don't work. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. They work better on some streets than they work on others. And depending on the characteristics of a street, they can turn into a slalom course for some people. You can have buses going on the wrong side of the flex stakes because they can't get through when there's cars parked on the street. And we get a lot of feedback about, anecdotally perhaps, about safety concerns with those flex sticks on some streets. And so the type of tool that you're using to evaluate just the reduction in speed is maybe not capturing what I think needs to be captured in terms of the evaluation, which is what do the public think? Do they think this street is appropriate? Should those measures go back? I try and do that every year. I try and do a survey on the street to say, do you want these back? Did they result in what you hoped for or not? And honestly, most of the streets where we put flex sticks, people don't want them back because they see them as more of a hazard. When I was campaigning last fall, I met a guy who had actually engineered taking one out on his own because he thought it was such a hazard. It was in the bushes. But I just think that we need to understand the impact more than just from the speed. I think they are doing what they're primarily intended to do, which is reducing traffic. But are they creating other roadway hazards? I think that's what we need to make sure that we understand with anything we do. So I guess that's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Deans. Councillor Dudas.
I might be jumping a little bit ahead here, and I know you're working on the pilot for photo radar. I was just curious as to whether that will be coming out of the TTC budget or if that will be another budget, and if us as councillors should start thinking about whether we should be allocating money towards that in future seasons.
The pilot program will be funded through our Safer Roads Ottawa program and our Safety Improvement program. And then going forward, once we've completed the pilot, we will make recommendations about how we would roll it out, including funding mechanisms going forward.
Once again, jumping the gun, do you have a rough idea as to how much that might cost?
We have not completed the tender process for the purchase of this service. We're working with the City of Toronto and other interested municipalities in Ontario. So hopefully in the next few months, we should have an idea of how much the cost will be to run a service like this.
So that might be one of those toolkit items we can anticipate in the future, potentially based on your recommendations.
Under temporary traffic calming, we'll have to evaluate through the pilot to determine that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ulof.
Thank you very much for running this program. Anybody who drives through Orleans knows that we make quite a heavy use of it. My question is about thermoplastic technology, and it seems to be that it provides the best value for our TTC budget as the installations are more resilient than paint. But right now, school zones and bike lane thermoplastics are available to us. Are there plans to design or procure additional designs, perhaps something like stop ahead, speed limit indicators, seniors crossings, that sort of thing? They seem to be quite resilient and provide the best value for our money.
We can certainly review that and to come up with some cost estimates for specific locations if you're interested in pursuing that.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thank you for the report. This is really important work that you're doing, and so I think we've made tremendous progress in the last several years on this program, so I just wanted to thank you for all that you do. This is obviously important for injuries, for deaths. Even a minor increase in speed drastically increases the severity of injuries and potential deaths that occur. So this is such an important program for the City of Ottawa. One question I had just is around the planters, because I'm in agreement with the report and everything else. But on the planters, I've had constituents suggest that they're a little bit ugly, that they may want to put them in, but putting that piece on their street may not be the best. Are there other options for the planters, wooden planters, or other options we could put in that may be a little bit nicer?
We can certainly investigate other forms of planters, more stylish ones.
Okay.
Typically, the neighborhood signs a contract to plant it, so there is an opportunity to make it look very nice through the plantings that are selected.
Okay.
But we could certainly look at the style of the planters themselves.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for all the work you've done.
Posh planters coming to the Glebe this summer. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. First off, again, thank you for the program. I do really appreciate having the TTC program available. It allows us to be very nimble. I'm not going to push back at the recommendation to include speed bumps in the toolkit. It does mean for some of us that it's a more challenging conversation with residents. I am a big fan of flex sticks. I think they cost, a third of what a speed bump would, and Councillor Kavanagh was asking about backlog. I think I've still got 60 streets that are looking for traffic calming measures that we are slowly addressing year after year. I'm going to have to say no to a lot of requests for speed bumps because that's just going to take that much more money out of my TTC budget that I could be using to do 2 or 3 streets at a time with the flexi sticks. But each councillor is going to take their own approach to it. That's the beauty of this program, is it's very nimble, very councillor-centric. It allows us to work quickly. So having it in the toolkit is clearly something that you've heard. One question is around the planters, not necessarily the aesthetics of them. In my office, you show a picture on one of these pages of the chicanes that you've created with the planters. And the stats tell us that you have put out 15 planter locations in the past 3 years. It's extremely difficult to get you guys to say yes to planters. A couple of years ago, we found that you became the department that says yes to traffic calming requests. You were, started working with us on trying to really push the edge of where you could put TTCs, but planter boxes are still something where I don't think I've been successful in any of my requests yet for planter boxes in the ward, maybe 1 or 2. Why are planter boxes and creating that kind of a scenario, the chicane or Wooner, so difficult to achieve?
It really depends on the location of the planter boxes. We do sometimes have to look at parking restrictions in order to be able to accommodate a planter box. Many times we request that a petition be completed by the residents to ensure that that is a fair trade-off for the residents of the street. So at times it's due to parking restrictions and no support for that. Sometimes we physically just can't fit it in because of the width of the roadway. Other times we do consult with emergency and protective services, so if there are issues associated with access, there could be reasons resulting from that consultation that prohibit us putting them in. So there are a whole host of reasons why we might not be able to do this, but we're certainly willing to evaluate each location that comes forward.
My ask of you would be to help me to try to get more of these planters in. You see only 15 in 4 years, and I think that they are very effective when you start to really physically restrict the street like that. It's slowing traffic down. And a couple of years ago, the department became very flexible, and you started working really hard to get to yes on some challenging situations for these measures. And I hope that we can work to really push the envelope on where these planter boxes go, because it's a tool that I just have not had a lot of success trying to use in the ward yet. So that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up on Councillor Dean's comments because it's disappointing that you had such a negative experience with it, but I think most councillors have had a very positive experience. In fact, in my case, at this time of year, I start getting emails, and I've shared them with Phil, asking when they're going to get their flex stakes back. So it's most of the neighbors in my area, at least, have had a very positive experience with them and very supportive of the program. I'm wondering, there's some numbers that I use. Well, for example, on the evaluation, you can put your speed board up in advance and track the data from how fast the cars are going and so on in that area, and then you put your speed board up after it's implemented and you get that information. The information I remember from those speed boards, and I share with the community when they ask about these things, is the painted numbers on the street. I believe you're getting a 17% improvement in compliance with the speed limit. And the flex stakes, I thought the number was 24%, like a very significant improvement. Are those numbers still valid, or have you found a different result now?
As Councillor Deans mentioned, it does vary based on the roadway, so it depends on the treatment that goes in, but those numbers are still what we're seeing in many of the locations.
So it's still, you're still getting like 24% or thereabouts improvement if anybody uses the flex stage?
Depends on the
average,
location,
depends.
yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I just want to add that in if I could, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hubley. Go ahead.
And just in response to Councillor Hubley, I'm not trying to create the impression that it's been a negative experience. As I said, I believe flex sticks do exactly what they're intended to do. They slow traffic on streets. Some streets are just better than others or more suited to a flex stick than others. And I know, I think I have a pretty good snapshot of what people think because I actually evaluate them at the end of this season and ask people for their feedback. So it's a mixed bag, and some streets are better than others. It's not, I didn't mean to create the impression I think it's a negative program or an overall negative experience, not at all.
Thank you very much, Councillor Deans. There are no other councillors on the speakers list. Is this item carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Phil and Krista. Item number 3 is the Area Traffic Management Program update, and we do have a presentation from Vivi and team.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. We're very happy to be here to present to you the update to the Area Traffic Management Program. The last time committee saw this process was back in 2004 when it was approved, and a lot has changed since then. We've had different policies, including complete streets. Lots of things have happened, and we also had a very many years of looking at how the old process had functioned, and there certainly needed some updates. So that's what we're presenting today. Beside me is Heidi Kuzno. She's the program manager of the ATM, the Area Traffic Management Program, and next to her is Justin Swan. He's on our team as the senior project manager on this file. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to present.
Thank you, Vivi, and thank you, Chair. So as Vivi said, excuse me, we are here today to present to you the proposed update to the Area Traffic Management Program, which includes an update to the processes used in this program, as well as the development of traffic calming design guidelines for the city. So as Vivi mentioned, in 2004, Council approved the Area Traffic Management Guidelines, which established a consistent approach to addressing requests for permanent traffic calming on existing streets. These studies are managed by the Area Traffic Management Program in Transportation Planning, and this program should not be confused with the ward-led temporary traffic calming program, which was just presented to you a few minutes ago from our colleagues in Traffic Services. In the past, funding for the Area Traffic Management Program was limited and inconsistent, which resulted in an extensive backlog of both study requests and the implementation of approved measures. The processes also resulted in smaller, simpler projects languishing at the bottom of the prioritization list. The need for an update to the ATM program to better meet expectations and manage limited resources was identified and outlined in an IPD report that was sent to Council in May of 2017. This report also identified the lack of city policies and rules of where various traffic calming measures are appropriate on city streets. So why are we here today? In 2017, we implemented some administrative updates to the ATM program through delegated authority. One example of this previous update is that we moved to a first-in, first-out approach for the implementation of approved studies, rather than reprioritizing each measure individually as was done in the past. But since 2017, the two other broader components identified in that IPD report have progressed. So this includes updating the processes used in the Area Traffic Management Program, which we are recommending to be rebranded as the Neighborhood Traffic Calming Program, to reflect more accurately the program's focus and purpose. It also includes developing traffic calming design guidelines to guide road designers in the application of traffic calming, whether it be localized retrofits through our program or included as part of other general roadway design projects. So we're here today to seek approval of the new streamlined neighborhood traffic calming study process and the new design guidelines. This update was developed with key stakeholder consultations. This included meetings with all councillors and city staff who work with the current ATM program regularly. It also included many collaborative consultations with several city departments where traffic calming projects could affect their work programs or services, such as, for example, emergency services, where, for example, we identified key streets that they use more frequently where the toolbox of traffic calming options should perhaps be more limited. It also included road services, OC Transport, and the like. We also sought input about general objectives from various public groups that were selected based on broad interests and consideration of traffic calming concerns from vulnerable road users. So here's a summary of some of the major topics stemming from the discussions with councillors and public and city staff. We heard things like we should focus on streets internal to neighborhoods where most of us live, play, and go to school. Education and communication is important. We need a robust toolbox of options. We should keep the processes simple. We should consider easier, quicker solutions first, and we should keep things equitable by continuing to prioritize citywide based on problem severity rather than by interest, but we should consider including additional equity considerations in the process. So, the guiding principles of the new neighborhood traffic calming study process will remain the same in the sense that we will continue to prioritize requests such that we are focusing on the most severe traffic concerns first. However, resources will now be focused on local and collector streets within neighborhoods, as well as village main streets. Focusing our resources on these streets, where small changes can have a big impact, provides higher value. This will permit more requests to be addressed. Also, in alignment with the city's road safety and complete street objectives, this program will focus resources primarily on addressing the issue of speeding. Traffic volume concerns may be addressed, provided speeding is also evident. The process will group simple and more complicated studies into two separate buckets. The focus will be on the smaller, simpler local traffic calming studies, which will address concerns related to speeding on a specific street. Whereas neighborhood traffic management studies will address concerns related to speeding and through traffic within a defined study area beyond just a specific street. The new neighborhood traffic calming study process has three main phases. The pre-study phase is where requests for permanent traffic calming are first screened to determine if they would qualify for the program. The purpose of this qualifying process is to make sure that the city screens in a manageable list of requests in consideration of available resources. It is not intended to imply that unqualified requests do not merit traffic calming. As part of the screening process, working with traffic services, we will continue to first consider simpler and quicker options to permanent traffic calming. All qualified study requests are then prioritized citywide based on problem severity and equity considerations. The processes to both screen and prioritize study requests have been streamlined and simplified. Data sets that did not add value have been removed. Other data sets have been added or modified to better reflect current city policies, such as considerations for cycling. The last two phases of the neighborhood traffic calming process includes the study phase, where we engage with residents on potential solutions, and the implementation phase, where the city carries out the design and construction of the approved measures. The processes in these phases have also been updated to help both manage resources and public expectations. Updated public engagement strategies, such as online surveys, are being used to reach a broader audience, making it easier and convenient to provide feedback, which will help increase public participation in the project. The limits of each study area will be more refined to focus efforts on the most problematic locations within the boundaries of each request. And finally, as previously indicated, the implementation of all approved traffic calming plans completed as part of the study phase will generally proceed on a first-in, first-out basis within the available annual program funding envelopes. This new first-in, first-out approach should mitigate the long wait between study implementation that was inherent with the 2004 ATM process. So as previously indicated, as part of this program update, we have also developed traffic calming design guidelines. We are one of the first municipalities to develop such comprehensive guidelines specific to traffic calming. Traffic calming measures can potentially be implemented on city streets in a number of ways, as standalone projects through our program, through road renewal projects, or as part of new development. The purpose of the design guidelines is to establish consistency in the consideration, design, and application of traffic calming, independent of the proponent or team that is implementing the measures. The guidelines adapt existing national guidelines to include Ottawa-specific guidance developed in consultation with key stakeholders. They are intended to help resolve long-standing competing interests as well as reduce the repetitive back-and-forth technical reviews that we have experienced on individual projects. A toolbox of measures have been included to help educate stakeholders by highlighting the primary potential advantages and disadvantages of each measure, implementation considerations, and Ottawa-specific context considerations for the various measures that can be considered on city streets. Proactively implementing traffic calming measures as part of renewal projects, if feasible within their budget and scope, is just one way to help achieve complete street objectives. Design guidance summarized in these new guidelines will help road designers make appropriate recommendations based on the existing operational characteristics, constraints, and context of each street. In this reference documents, guidance is provided with respect to the consideration of primary road network efficiency, such as transit routes, key emergency response streets, and road maintenance and operational requirements. So just as examples, the guidelines provide recommendations for the minimum size of pinch points on streets depending on their operational needs, or where certain vertical elements such as traditional speed humps are not recommended because of the nature of the street either being a high-frequency transit route or a key emergency response street identified by emergency services. So in summary, this update will translate into the following benefits. The entire study process will be more efficient, eliminating many of the frustrations inherent with the previous process. It will also result in shorter timelines between study completion and implementation. The traffic calming design guidelines will improve the consistency in the planning and design of traffic calming measures, regardless of who the proponent is. They will also be another source of Ottawa-specific guidance to road designers when using a complete street approach to assess potential improvements for all road users. Upon Council's approval of this program update, we will finalize the documentation for the new neighborhood traffic calming study process and the traffic calming design guidelines so that they can each be posted on the city's website. We will proceed to rescreen and reprioritize all current study requests and advise ward councillors accordingly so we can finalize the status of each current study request on a case-by-case basis. Moving forward, all new requests will follow the new qualification and prioritization processes. Following approval of the design guidelines, we will initiate an awareness campaign to help city staff involved in road design take full advantage of their guidance. Before we proceed to answering any questions that you may have, we would like to take this opportunity again to thank all members of Transportation Committee and Council for their participation in the development of this update.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. We do have a delegation from the public. Mr. Alex Cullen. Is Alex here? Here we are. Oh, yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alex Cullen. I'm here representing the Federation of Citizens Associations. This is an umbrella group of community associations across the city. We have 50 members. I'd like to make a small correction to the report. We were consulted in this process, and we were pleased to participate in this process. We are in support of the report. But the reference in the report refers to the Federation of Community Associations. That's not us. We've been around for 30 years. We are the Federation of Citizens Associations, Fédération des Associations Civiques. We are certainly in support of this program, as I think it comes as no surprise to any councillor here that the #1 issue in communities is traffic calming. We're getting more and more cars. People expect to get from A to B as fast as they did in the past, and it's not always possible given both the growth of the city, congestion, and there's a very, very heightened awareness of traffic speed, volume, and safety in our neighborhoods. The Federation has surveyed its members. This comes up, traffic calming comes up as the #1 issue amongst our members. So, supporting the program before us, we're pleased to see that it's going to be more efficient, it's going to be more streamlined. The problem lies with the fact that there's no more money going into this program. We have, because of limited funding, over the years, we've been able to do 2 or 3 projects a year. There is an extensive backlog, and it's frustrating our members that they have identified programs, some of them are in the queue, and it seems to take forever before that project is acted upon. Just last month, we were before this committee asking for more resources to go into traffic calming to address that issue. So as much as we're pleased to support this report, you need to put the money to make sure that the program works, because it's unconscionable that communities must wait 5, 6 years before their project comes to the top of the list. So this is a good report. Please ensure that you put the funds in it to make it work so you respond to community needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming out. We do have another member of the public, Mr. John Woodhouse. Thank you for coming, Mr. Woodhouse.
Good day. My name is John Woodhouse. I've been listening to these 2 presentations. I live at 55 Coburg. Is there any way that we can punch up Coburg Street?
Would it be possible to pull up Coburg Street on Google Maps or something like that on the computer?
Because I wish to bring to attention the number of times that I've been hit. 3 times I've been hit on the street in the past 2 years. The main problem is speeding. There's only one stop sign between Rideau Street and St. Patrick Street. The stop sign is at the intersection of Coburg and Clarence, and that's the corner which I live at. Right now on that particular section of Coburg Street, there is one speed sign just near the McDonald Park. And yes, thank you. Well, yeah, that's even a bit better. Because there's only one stop sign where that cursor is. There's a seniors crossing sign further up near McDonald Garden Park. Cars come down there at quite a speed, and they don't stop at the stop sign. One of the main reasons was there was a bus stop there. so that the drivers could not see the stop sign. The stop sign was moved back. Cars do not stop. They just go right through that. And that is where I was hit twice. I'm a very defensive driver because I know at the speed that these people drive down. And all 3 times it was in the evening. Once I was almost blindsided. Thank goodness I saw the car coming, and I gauged the speed, and I realized that it was not going to stop. So I had to defensively turn to avoid a head-on collision. So he just gracefully sideswiped the side of my chair. Not much damage done. The other time was at the intersection of Boulder Lane and Coburg Street. There is a stop sign there, but people like to go through that stop sign as well and turn on to Coburg Street. There I was crossing the street. A person was looking to her left, did not see me cross the street, and she proceeded to turn on to Coburg Street with me right in front of her car. So she pushed me about a good 5 or 10 feet before I banged on the hood of the car to identify that I was there. And my main concern is that there is old age people crossing that street at the McDonald Park to go there for recreation, and also at the crossing of Coburg and Old St. Patrick. There is a school there that a high volume of students. Now they get off at a bus stop right by the Old St. Patrick, and they have to cross with no stop signs, and the traffic still in the morning, and as soon as I'm crossing, I'm still going at a good speed. I'm concerned that students might get injured. More street calming must be made on this street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woodhouse, for your presentation. Are there any questions for Mr. Woodhouse? Councillor Lula?
Just a quick comment, John. Thanks again for your input on this. I lived, when I was going to university, at 436 Clarence on the other side of 50 Coburg, and I do remember a couple of the incidents that you're mentioning. This is a particularly bad area for traffic, and so I want to let you know that we really appreciate your input on this subject.
Well, thank you. I'm mainly interested for the senior citizens and for the school kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodhouse. Maybe staff could loop in with the councillor for the area and see if there are ways to address the concerns of the resident?
Yes, I have good news, actually. We did study this area. It's our Lower Town study, and this project is actually in design. So we have some measures identified along Coburg, raised intersections, some narrowings, and Heidi?
As Vivi mentioned, this was one of our neighborhood level studies where we have some measures peppered throughout on Coburg, on Old St. Patrick itself. We have a new PXO coming in at Beausoleil, a raised crosswalk at Clarence, and changes to the bus stop configuration there to help with the concern of the low stop compliance of that bus stop, as well as some other changes at Coburg and Old St. Patrick. They are in design right now with the hopes of being implemented this year.
That's excellent news. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out, John. Appreciate it. That's the end of the public delegations. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none. So item carried? Okay. Carried. Thank you very much. We approved item 4. Did we hold item 5? So we do have a presentation for item 5.
Good morning, Chair. We're pleased to be here to provide committee an update on our review of the road activity bylaw. The road activity bylaw is one of the city's key bylaws that regulate the use of our roads, particularly during construction activity and the installation of utility work. This has been a substantial project that staff have been undertaking over the course of 9 months. Led by my team, and I'll introduce Linda Karkner, Program Manager of Right Away on my far left, Rob McLaughlin, our Bylaw Review Specialist, who has been the lead on this project for the team, and Kevin Lamer, who's the Program Manager of Inspections. It's been an integrated project with staff from across the organization, including staff from Infrastructure Services, Road Services, and Traffic Services, who are also here in the gallery to provide support as required. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. McLaughlin to lead you through a brief presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Court. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. To begin with a bit of background on the road activity bylaw, this is the principal bylaw used by the city to regulate work on the city's roads, and it applies equally to work done by contractors, to utilities, as well as to city departments. It applies on all portions of the road, whether that be the boulevard, the sidewalk, or the paved portion of the roadway, and where the work requires a cut into the road itself, a road cut permit must also be obtained. Generally speaking, the objectives of the bylaw are to coordinate the work, to mitigate impacts on mobility, as well as to protect the city's infrastructure. In terms of the need for the review, the bylaw was passed in 2003 and has not been comprehensively reviewed. Specifically, the regulations that manage how work is completed, as well as the associated fees, business processes, and securities have not been reviewed since 2003, and work within the city's roads has been steadily increasing. With respect to development, there is no opportunity within the bylaw currently to require a developer to resurface the road cuts that have been done in association with the development, to provide for an improved surface reinstatement, and this has a particular impact on local roads where there is a prevalence of infill. The review of the bylaw is proceeding in 3 parts, or has 3 integrated parts, I should say. The first is obviously the review of the bylaw itself and a comprehensive review of all of its elements. And this has included a review of similar regulations in other municipalities across Canada to determine best practices. The second is a comprehensive review of the business processes, including a comprehensive review of the fees, as well as the pavement degradation fees. The third is a move to increase or augment the oversight of inspections related to road activity and road cuts. And this involves transferring the responsibility for road cut reinstatement inspections from traffic services to the inspections branch of the right-of-way heritage and urban design service area. Overall, the objective is to ensure that there are the regulatory tools in place and the business processes to effectively manage work within the city's roads, to minimize disruption to residents, and to ensure quality restoration which protects the city's infrastructure, all while working to improve client service. The review is being conducted in 2 phases. The first phase is centered around the necessary amendments to address immediate operational needs, as well as the development resurfacing, and to begin the inspection transition from traffic services over to the inspections branch in related to road cut reinstatements. These are the topics of the report before you today. The second phase will focus on a comprehensive review of the fees, the establishment of permit streams, as well as a comprehensive review of the business processes, as well as implementing resurfacing requirements for contexts outside of development, such as with respect to cuts associated with utilities. A report to Transportation Committee with recommendations related to these matters is targeted for next year. As mentioned, the amendments proposed in this report are intended to address immediate operational needs related to achieving the objectives of the bylaw, and in particular establishing resurfacing requirements for development. This includes amendments in relation to pavement degradation fees and restrictions on cuts into new pavement, traffic management, enforcement tools, public notification, as well as the resurfacing by developers. And I'll touch on each of these in the slides following this one. The amendments are proposed to come into effect on the 1st of July this year. This is to ensure staff have time to complete the necessary business processes as well as undertake the necessary training to ensure that these amendments are implemented successfully, as well as to provide notice, education, and an opportunity for transition for stakeholders. As part of augmenting the oversight of road cuts, the report recommends the creation of 2 inspector positions, which along with a 3rd inspector coming from traffic services would provide for a team of 3 inspection staff responsible for road cut reinstatement inspections. Approval to purchase 3 new vehicles to support these inspectors is also sought. As regards pavement degradation fees and restrictions on cuts into new pavement, to provide the committee with a bit of context on each, pavement degradation fees are required when a cut is made into the roadway pavement, and the intent of this fee is to compensate the city for the impact the cut has on the accelerated decline of the pavement. Restrictions on cuts into new pavement mean that in the case of roads that have been constructed, reconstructed, or resurfaced in the last 3 years, no road cut permits may be issued except in certain circumstances, such as in the case of an emergency or in relation to development. Under the existing bylaw, these regulations apply on arterial roads, and it is proposed that the application of these regulations be expanded to all roads. With respect to traffic management, it is proposed to expand the application of the existing regulations around the mitigation of mobility, specifically when a traffic management plan is required as part of a road cut permit application, as well as where restrictions on work during rush hour periods are to apply. Under the existing bylaw, these regulations are applicable on arterial roads as well as collector roads with bus routes, and it is proposed that these now apply on roads classified as collectors and above. It is also proposed with respect to the restrictions on work during rush hour periods that the PM work restriction period be extended from 5:30 to 6 p.m. Existing enforcement tools that focus around the issuance of fines are proposed to be strengthened with amendments that clarify staff's authority to modify, suspend, revoke, or refuse road cut permits, for example, where an applicant has outstanding deficiencies or outstanding work under previously issued permits, as well as the authority to require the production of documents to confirm the use of materials that are in compliance with the city's standards. On a similar note, updates to securities and insurance requirements are also proposed to ensure that any risks to the city are appropriately mitigated. For public notification, the proposed amendments have been revised are proposed to revise the existing requirements with respect to when residents, businesses, and the ward councillor would receive notice, with the intent being that there would be more advance notice in relation to work that impacts on mobility, such as where there is a full road closure, or the rerouting of buses, or the closure of a sidewalk such that a pedestrian is required to take an alternate route, or where the work is expected to last for a duration longer than 7 days, which generally represents projects that have a greater neighborhood presence. Finally, amendments are proposed to authorize staff to require a developer to resurface the road cuts associated with their development, where there are 3 or more road cuts in the pavement. The extent of the resurfacing will be based on established and consistent criteria, and this will have the added benefit of providing clear expectations for developers with respect to these requirements. As part of the review, staff have consulted with a number of external organizations whose members work within the city's roads. And from these organizations, representatives were solicited to form a technical advisory committee to provide a forum for both discussion and feedback in relation to the proposed amendments. An internal working group of staff from departments who work within the city's roads was also formed with a similar objective. And notice to groups representing residents and businesses with information and background in relation to the review was also provided. And you'll see on the screen a listing of those organizations. In terms of next steps, staff will continue to work towards the implementation of the amendments for July the 1st, and will be monitoring their application going forward. Staff will be continuing the stakeholder and public engagement as the review progresses into the second phase, as well as beginning the second phase of the review. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. There are no delegations from the public. Are there any questions for staff? Councillor Alchantier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for making themselves available. We met with, I think they met with most committee members. When you talk about hiring of 2 inspectors, and is there some cost recovery when we hire those folks when they go on the road and do their job? Is there some kind of cost recovery on this?
So the current cost recovery would be through the permit process itself, but that's part of our conversation for the second phase, Councillor, to look at those 2 streams. So for projects that are larger in duration and larger in context, there may be opportunities then to look at direct charges for the inspection fees.
Because what we are seeing in the past is the lack of inspector available to monitor, and it sometimes will cost the city more if we don't have inspector on the site to make sure protect our asset. And so I was just wondering, it doesn't seem you include that in your presentation, either the cost recovery or the cost saving when you have those people monitor, when we see inspector monitoring our road work.
Yes, we would agree with you, and that certainly is why we're doing that more comprehensive review of all of those costs and business process in the second phase. We needed to get this initial work done, at least to get the additional inspectors to assist us now, but there is a more comprehensive fee review coming.
And in the past, as a councillor who represent the BIA's group, time and time again, they said they would like to be engaged in knowing what kind of road work's going to happen in their community or in their catchment area. Would your group will work with these folks and make sure the report goes to the BIAs, before circulation or during circulation, so they'll know this is happening in their community?
Mr. Chair, certainly we have been notifying the Ottawa Council of Business Improvement Areas as part of this report, and we'll continue to consult with them throughout the second phase of this review. And as regards particular roadworks and notification with respect to those, it is the intent that by augmenting the notice requirements to include the ward councillors, that they would then push that notification out to their communities and to the businesses.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very brief thank you to the team for everything that you've done. 9 months of work to get to this point, and I know there's more to come. I've been pestering senior management about this for several years now, as the houses in Kitchissippi keep coming down and getting replaced with infill. Every one of those is a road cut. The quality of our roads is deteriorating much sooner than life cycle would ordinarily see. So I'm glad to see that we're looking at that cost recovery mechanism in order to help keep up with the damage that infill is doing to our roads. Please count on my help and those of the residents as you go through the next steps. Thank you.
First time in 7 years.
Thank you very much, Councillor Leeper. Don't see any other questions. This item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Meeting with all the members.
Brilliant. And Councillor El-Chantiry just said, good job meeting with all the members of the committee, so thank you for that, Court and team. The next item on the agenda is the Councillor's Report, review of winter maintenance standards. There is no presentation on this, but I'll give Councillor Kavanaugh an opportunity to speak to it before we take the public delegations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank all the city staff, particularly Mr. Wiley, on his leadership on this. This is obviously very, very timely. We've just experienced a very, very difficult winter, and we've seen conditions we've never seen before. Our standards that had been previously in place just didn't cut it, and I think we all recognize that, and it was time for a review. One of the big factors that we had was ice. Ice is not something that we have really addressed in the standards, and it's been incredibly difficult to deal with, particularly for pedestrians. And it's something that is very problematic in terms of just getting to the bus stop, getting to school. It's stuff we've never seen. Climate change is a big factor. What's happened since we had that review back in 2003? Well, that's a long time ago, and I really appreciate staff taking this on. This is going to be great for the whole city. It fits into our official plan. My only thought is that we all want it now. We want it as soon as possible, and I understand that there's some concern in terms of how long this takes, because it is a very, very large study. But I just want to say thank you again to staff in terms of recognizing the importance. We've all seen it in all our communities on how important it is to take another look at what we do for our, in terms of active transportation, in terms of people being able to get to that LRT station that we hope to have soon. So we want to get people out there and make full use of the winter. As the good weather comes by, we may start to forget about how difficult it was, but it was a difficult winter, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We do have 4 delegates from the public. She didn't. So we have Mr. Gavin King. If you could just hit the button.
Oh, yes. Yeah, hello, Chairman, Transportation Committee members. I'm here representing Ecology Ottawa, and we're here to express our support for the motion. We'd like to thank, first of all, Councillor Kavanaugh for bringing this motion forward, and also the Council on Aging's Age-Friendly Pedestrian Safety and Walkability Committee for their advocacy on this important issue. As we all know, pedestrian access is critically important to a healthy, vibrant, and inclusive city. With climate change, the challenge of maintaining mobility on Ottawa's roads, pathways, and sidewalks has grown more difficult. Since the city last updated the winter maintenance standards in 2003, Ottawa's weather patterns have changed. More freeze-thaw cycles, more wet weather, and more extreme weather events are already having a serious impact on pedestrian conditions. Many of our supporters at Ecology Ottawa who are older or who have mobility or accessibility issues are especially vulnerable when it comes to poor sidewalk conditions. Poor winter weather often forces them to stay indoors, leading to social isolation, while slips and falls on icy sidewalks result in many serious injuries every year. Due to the increase in freeze-thaw cycles brought about by climate change, ice buildup on Ottawa's pathways and sidewalks has increased in the 16 years since maintenance standards were set. The city must find a way to help mitigate this challenge and ensure the basic mobility needs of all residents, especially the most vulnerable, are met. Ottawa's changing weather patterns have also impacted cyclists in Ottawa, especially as year-round cycling has become increasingly popular. Pathways and bike lanes on our roads are too often icy and poorly maintained. We know the City of Ottawa wants to encourage more cycling and that safety is a primary consideration for potential cyclists. We also know that the city's Complete Streets policy is designed to integrate cycling options into Ottawa's streets at scale. This policy was developed in 2013, long after the last review of the winter maintenance standards. We would therefore encourage a review of the WMS that integrates the objectives of the Complete Streets policy and improves snow and ice remediation on Ottawa's bike paths and street lanes. We ask that members of this committee recognize the need to update and improve the city's snow and ice clearing standards and support this motion. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. King? Seeing none, we have, the next speaker is Stephen Saint-Denis, Petite Stéphane Saint-Denis.
Thank you. I have, in case you know me, the notorious over-publicized Stephen Saint-Denis. You may have read in the papers yesterday about my incident on Sunday, but the real issue is not about someone in a wheelchair getting trapped. I kept telling the reporter to focus on the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is the city has failed this winter to provide the basic service of adequate snow and ice removal. I mean, look at the last 24 months. We've had major flooding, we've had tornadoes, we've had record heat waves, we've had the summer of 2017, there was so much rain, the farmers couldn't plant their crops. And now we have one of the most severe winters in recent history. So, we can all agree that climate change is here. It's here. And then for us to start a 2-year study on how we can mitigate some of the effects. It's not acceptable. The last thing we need is another study, right? Instead of looking at the cost of what it would take to provide adequate snow removal, let's look at the cost of not doing it. How many people have injured themselves falling on the ice or having to climb snow banks? Let's look at the real cost. What is the cost what is the cost to distract what is the cost to emergency services? What is the cost to increase traffic what is the cost of increased traffic in a hospital? What is the cost of the lost productivity of people who have had to miss work? How many work days have been missed? So, the last thing I want to hear about with respect to Ms. Kavanaugh, I know she has good intentions, but the last thing we need is another 2-year study on how we are going to deal with climate change. It's here. just like the last one, I'm not going to be doing statues. They're going to become more and more the new norm. We have to deal with it accordingly.
Thank you very much, Mr. St. Denis. Councillor Leeper does have a question.
Thank you. I'll take advantage of having the mic. Mr. St. Denis, I agree entirely with you that we need to accelerate this process. Councillor Kavanagh does have a motion. She doesn't sit on this committee, but I'll put it forward on her behalf to amend the timeline. Councillor Kavanagh's motion reads, therefore be it resolved that this item be amended such that staff will bring forward a report for consideration as part of the 2021 budget. I believe right now the report currently reads 2022. So I'll put that on the floor now. Mr. St. Denis, I do have a question for you, which is with respect to the timelines and the need to study. It isn't actually immediately apparent to me how we adjust our budget to spend money on sidewalk clearing particularly, in light of the fact that the current sidewalk standards, the current way we plow our sidewalks are for an environment that was very different 15 years ago. We go out and we try to plow our sidewalks and we try to salt and grit our sidewalks. And I'm not entirely certain that simply spending more money on more plowing, more salt, more grit is the best way to actually address winters that are very different from what they were when I was growing up in Ottawa. If the city were to spend more money and we wanted to do it immediately, how would you spend that money?
Well, I showed you also presentation on winter maintenance. I believe it was March 20th, and in that presentation, it sets very clear standards for the different categories of sidewalk. And not before we think about new standards, let's try to enforce the existing standards.
I absolutely get that, Mr. St. Denis. I'm not sure that we're going to achieve meeting our standards through reclassification of sidewalks and doing things the way we always have done them before. I think it's worthwhile.
Let's keep this to questions.
Okay. Yep. You've raised some valuable perspectives. I'm glad to get Councillor Kavanagh's motion on the table, and I agree with you that we need to do it more quickly. Thanks, Steve. Chair.
Steve is fine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. St. Denis, for coming out. I know you never meant to be a poster boy for this. This motion was something that came out of a lot of work, a lot of observation of just how serious the climate change has influenced the weather patterns, as you have pointed out, including tornadoes, everything else, and how we have to take a good, solid look at it. And with great respect, I would love to do it right away. I'd like to move up the timeline. I support Mr. Leeper in putting forward that motion to move it up. It's going to take a lot of work. We do need more equipment. One of the biggest factors...
Councillor, this is a time for questions, please.
Yes, you're right. Do you agree that this is urgent based on climate change and that ice is one of the bigger factors in terms of what the changes are in the winter conditions?
Yes, but I thought that when the existing study was set back in 2003, but when they talked about snow removal, I think it was implicit that they also meant ice removal.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out, Mr. St. Denis. And I noticed you came in before after the start of the meeting, and so you may have missed that after this item, we're going to be debating an item to do an immediate review of our operations for winter operations for implementation this coming winter. And so that might bring you some relief. So thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you for letting me speak.
The next speaker is John Woodhouse. Would you still like to speak, Mr. Woodhouse? Yeah. Perfect.
I most highly support Mr. Denis' statement. This winter, for unprecedented, 3 times I've had to have my wheelchair repaired. This year, I also tumbled out of my chair twice, slightly injuring myself. I have tried to go to my committee appointments when I'm not housebound by the lack of sidewalk clearance. I have numerous times had to take Coburg Street up to Rideau to catch a bus because I could not get on the sidewalks, and even if I couldn't get on the sidewalks, the bus stops were not cleared. And twice I had to go from my house to the Rideau Center to get on a bus. Not nice. And the level of clearance must be addressed immediately because this is a dangerous occurrence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Is there any questions for Mr. Woodhouse? Seeing none, thanks for coming out. We have another speaker. I don't know that we know this person, Mr. Alex Cullen. He's new to committee. And he enjoys my teasing of him. Councillor Leeper has a good point here. Have you ever counted how many presentations you've made to committee over the years?
over the years.
Yeah.
It would be a lot, Mr. Chairman.
thank
and
you.
it's normally, with respect to the organizations I represent, it's not so much that I wish to make the presentations, but that my membership in the Federation of Citizens Associations have a message to deliver. And unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, they've chosen me.
We understand.
So,
and
thank you.
know that
It's
you
a
enjoy
burden,
the
Mr.
living.
Chairman, I tell you, but I shoulder it manfully. So I'm here representing the Federation of Citizens Associations. I'm very pleased to support, or our association is very pleased to support the initiative here to review the winter maintenance standards. We have been asking for this, the Federation has been asking for this for the past 2 years. The city has a transportation master plan that calls for increased walking, cycling, transit use. Ottawa is a winter city, so those goals don't apply just over the summer months. They must also apply in the winter months. Clearly, we need to change our standards in order to achieve those goals so that more people can walk safely, some may cycle, but certainly use our roads safely in the wintertime as well as the off-season from winter. The one issue that I want to bring to your attention is the language that is in, staff have provided in Councillor Brockington's inquiry about winter standards. It's the second page, bottom paragraph, where it speaks to the timing. Given the time requirements for extensive public and councillor consultations, scoping, selection, and completion of the review, reporting and approval by council, and any procurement activities related to the recommendations approved by council, management would expect a revised maintenance quality standards to be in effect for the 2022-23 winter season. And I noticed that the motion, the initial motion that was provided, talks about having a report for consideration that would be go through to the 2022 budget. So I just want you folks to pause and think a bit. We've had an awful winter, and you expect people to go through the winter of 2019-2020 with the same standards, the winter of 2020-2021 with the same standards, and if you adopt the staff proposal, 2021-2022 with the same standards. Now, I know this is Ottawa, we're bureaucratic, things are slow, but to expect residents of Ottawa to live through 3 more winters with quality standards that communities, not just the FCA, but the Council on Aging and others, have brought to your attention and said this is not adequate, is too long. So you may deduct from that that moving it up by 1 year, as Councillor Leeper is suggesting, a very good step, still means that we're going to go through 2 more winters with outmoded standards. So I would suggest that you might want to consider that. That's my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen. Are there any questions for Mr. Cullen? Seeing none, there are no more public delegations. Councillor Leeper has introduced an amending motion, so any discussion is on the amendment to accelerate to 2021. Councillor Deans.
Well, just a couple questions. One, does staff agree that we could accelerate to 2021?
Chair, no, we don't.
Could, Mr. Wiley, could you perhaps elaborate as to,
Certainly, Chair.
why?
We don't have funding to do the study currently. We don't have the scope done yet, and I actually thank Councillor Kavanagh for bringing forth the motion, because that does inform our scope. If the motion does pass, we will be scoping the study, costing that scope, and getting it into the next budget cycle, which will start, I'll remind councillors, will start in the late summer, early fall. That budget will pass and funds will be available in January of 2020. It's not a 2-year study. It'll be a 1-year study. As Councillor Kavanagh pointed out, it's a very comprehensive study, and we want to make sure that we cover all the details, because we want to come back to council and committee with full flexibility, full list of options, and different costing solutions for council to consider. And some of the things we'll be looking at, there's a ton of data collection that we'll have to do. For instance, if we're looking at sidewalks around transit hubs, or residential roads that don't have sidewalks around schools, that all has to be collected. We'll be identifying the options, as I said, costing, resourcing those options. Then we want to consult fully with the public on all the options that we identify. Then we'll be preparing a staff report, going to committee and going to council, and then it has to be inputted into the next budget cycle, which again will be summer of 2020, so it just doesn't give us enough time to do a fulsome study.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Wiley. You know, after the winter we've all come through, I think especially for our vulnerable citizens, but for everyone, it's been a tough winter and a long winter, and the freeze-thaw cycle that we saw has really complicated mobility for many people. So I think we're all anxious to get on with this. So what I really want to understand is if I mean, obviously, we need to take the time to do this properly, but your motion, Mr. Chair, seems to be trying to address some short-term mitigation measures while we do the longer-term study. Is that right? And I'm just trying to understand the difference between the two motions. What you think we could accomplish with the short-term motion while we await the actual study that Councillor Kavanagh is suggesting?
Well, thank you. So the motion that will come after this is to direct staff to do an operational review of winter maintenance and report back to us late summer, early fall before this winter season on improvements they can make for this winter season. I know, as a councillor for Cumberland, I've often heard, we do things this way, councillor, because that's how it's always been done in Cumberland. And in Canada, they might do it differently, and in Barrhaven, they might do it differently, and in the center town, they might do it differently. And 20 years after amalgamation, I'm not sure that that's how we've always done it is a satisfactory answer, and I think there are ways, and I think staff agree that there might be operational improvements that we can make within existing resources and our existing standards while we're doing the larger review of improving the standards.
Okay, and Mr. Wiley, then just back to you. Do you agree with that approach, that we could make some shorter-term changes within our existing standards that might improve, for example, if we had put them in place, may have improved operations over this past winter?
Chair, yes, we do. The way I look at it is Chair Blai's motion talks about an internal review. Our MQS review will definitely be an external public review. But in terms of the operational review that we'll be conducting over the summer, we'll be looking at deployment consistency, as the chair said. We'll be looking at resource balancing between our 4 districts. We'll be looking at potentially geographic boundaries, et cetera. So those are things we can do internally to better position ourselves for deployment this winter.
Okay, and just one last question. Have we ever done any geographic mapping of pockets of where our vulnerable citizens live? Because, I mean, we did hear today, you know, the real challenges that vulnerable citizens face in winter like this one, and I'm just wondering if there's some way of doing some mapping. Obviously couldn't capture everyone, but if there's pockets of senior citizens, for example, if there's some standard that we could be looking at to assist those people in the winter.
Chair, I believe through the last iteration of the pedestrian plan, they did look at hubs such as senior citizen hubs, certainly transit hubs, and potentially other hubs. We could review that and get back to the councillor.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Deans. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. We held a snow clearing forum on the 20th, and it was very successful in terms of having the number of folks that came out. We had 100 people out there, mostly from urban wards, but the issues that they were raising certainly relevant for rural areas and suburban areas in the city. So I just want to thank Mr. Wiley, Mr. Demias, who was there as well, and Mr. Gagne, who participated in that. One of the things that came out of that forum was the need to really review the standards, and there was a commitment made there. And so I just want to get down to the timing of this, because the motion talks about part of the 2022 budget, but normally I think we wouldn't actually bring this type of a policy to the budget. It would be before that, to make sure that we've got our issues aligned. And then I also read in an inquiry response, I guess, to Councillor Brockington's inquiry, that we may see the maintenance quality standards implemented as late as the winter of 2023. And so I just want to be clear on that we're going to get these new maintenance quality standards done this term, and that the implementation of them will occur this term.
Chair, the councillor is correct. We would bring a report prior to the budget with all the options for council to consider. They would make a decision on that, and that would be then go into the budget deliberations and would be implemented 2022, 2023.
Okay, and I guess to reiterate, I think this, maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, Chair, but I think this committee and this council wants to see implementation this term. If it happens to be that the report comes at a different time, I'm fine with that. But I want to see it implemented before the end of the term in 2022, so that winter by 2022 is seeing the changes that we need to see. So, regardless of the Kavanaugh motion, I think this council needs to see implementation this term under this chair and under this council. So I just reiterate that's hopefully direction. With regard to the motion, I'm actually pleased to hear what you're saying, because likely committee will receive this back before budget 2022. Is that fair to assume?
Correct, Chair.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And just to remind everyone, the 2022 budget will be tabled and debated in the fall of 2021, which means Mr. Wiley's report will presumably be wrapped up before that time. So it's really not a 2-year study. It's more like a 1-year study, as Mr. Wiley had mentioned. And so, Councillor Dudas. If Councillor Dudas is fine. Councillor Leeper, I have you down.
Thanks, and I apologize, I'll run over some of the same ground again, but how much are we expecting that study to cost?
Chair, it depends on the scope, but I know the first time around, you know, you're looking at a couple $100,000, something in that effect.
So in the current timetable, and I just want to make sure that I understand the timing well, in December of 2019, you are expecting council will give you, that $250,000 in order to launch the study?
Correct.
And I don't doubt that council will. I think I've heard for the first time since I've been elected, a clear acceptance by everybody around this table that we have to do better on sidewalks. So you cannot have that study done by August of 2020 then?
No, Chair. To be completely honest, if we took a very, I'll call it a simplistic approach, and just decided to fast track it, we would come up with options like bare off all residential roads, bare off all sidewalks. Of course, the resource and costing of that would be quite substantial, and I don't think that would give council the flexibility they're looking forward to in a study of this type. So the amount of iterations and considerations and some of the discussions I've had with councillors around the table about residential roads with no sidewalks but near schools, about sidewalks around transit stations, transit hubs, about connectivity, all that, and bringing in all that data and then doing all those iterations, that's a fairly time-consuming and labor-consuming exercise. So I guess what I'm saying in a nutshell is to do it properly, we need the time to do it properly.
Okay. Because if we had it by August of 2020, we could get that into the subsequent budget cycle, but you're saying we just won't have time. And is there no way, and I'm sorry, this is something that probably should have come to the table sooner, but $250,000 within our budget seems like something that we should be able to find sooner. Have you beat those bushes?
Chair, with the winter we had last year, we are certainly not in a surplus situation or do have funds to identify.
And I know the count is still, or the dollar signs are still ticking up even with the snowpack that we still have. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we all went through this last winter. I know I talked a lot with Kevin's team over sidewalk clearing in my area and that. I never had one resident contact me and say, please study this. Please get a report done quicker on this. What they asked me to do was fix it and get out there and get the sidewalks cleared. I saw your staff experiment with new equipment this year to try to find a way to get through the ice that was in the sidewalks. And I saw a lot of extra effort being put in there. As you mentioned, you used a lot of your budget to bring out more removal teams to try and deal with this. So I'm not going to support the Kavanaugh motion because I don't think any one of our residents really want to see a study. What they want to see is us do something to fix this, and so the chair's motion to have an operational review and come back before next winter with ideas on how we're going to do a better job, if we face another winter like we just did, I think is the way to go, so I'll be supporting the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Councillor Menard would like me to clarify that the recommendations on what the process will deliver will actually be public in 2021 because we debate the 2022 budget in 2021 in the fall. This year's budget is an aberration because of the election year, obviously. Councillor DeRuse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will add, I will be supporting the chair motion, and for a few reasons, and one of it is, I know that we've been debating this, and I know that I realize we did have very hard winter. Mother Nature tried us in every tools that she have in her hand to make our winter hard in this year. I know the ice and the snow was very heavy this year, but I also, there is one thing that I want to make sure that we address when we look at the review, and especially with the resources that we have, because I realize if you look at across the city, geographically, we're massive. I know there is so many long beats and short beats and whatnot, but also what we addressed this in the last term, and we did brought it to the Transportation Committee, that we need to also look at the snow amount that comes between west, east, and south. And I know that we live in massive geographically, like city of Ottawa is massive. So sometimes you'll have 8 centimeter in Orleans and you'll have 3 in Canada. We need to make sure and we need to be able to give those tools and this ability to our supervisor and road supervisor that in the yard to be able to deploy equipment, and we cannot wait to have 8 centimeter across Ottawa, because sometimes you'll have a freezing rain in Orleans and you'll have a snow in Canada or south, and you know that we cannot control these elements. So I hope for that, I know and I'm very confident that I'm looking forward for the report to review with your staff and coming back to us before next winter, because I know I could see from the local that we have some area they were well maintained, and then you have some other area they're not maintained. And you look at it, there is same equipment, same weather pattern. So hopefully in that review that you can really focus on those two and let us know how you're going to be able to implement that on the before next season. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor DeRuse. Councillor Deans, very quickly, because...
Yeah, very quickly. I just want to say that I support both of these motions that are coming forward, and I don't see them at all as mutually exclusive. I mean, what the chair seems to be suggesting is within existing budgets, having come through a really harsh winter, that we need to look at any adjustments that we could make within existing resources to better be in a position to address another winter like we just came through. But in the longer term, after about 20 years since amalgamation, it's time to do a comprehensive look at the service standard in this area, and that's going to take time and resources, and it's something that the staff suggests that we think is timely to do, and we should get on with it. So I don't know why we wouldn't do both, and that's just all I wanted to point out.
Okay, thank you very much. So the question before us is actually the amendment to change the report to 2021, which staff say they cannot accommodate. My recommendation is to not support the amendment because it cannot be accommodated within the work plan of staff as it is today, and there are not any financial resources to accommodate that.
Chair, I'm going to withdraw that on Council.
Okay, so the amendment to 2021 is withdrawn. Thank you very much.
And I just have a further, very quick amendment, Chair, to the main motion.
Okay.
And it's just to change exactly what you had said before, bring forward a report for consideration, not as part of the 2022 budget, but within 2021. That's what we've heard from staff. That's what you confirmed. We're going to see a report in 2021. That's just not part of the budget. So it would to be removing as part of the 2022 budget and say for consideration in 2021 and leave it there, which is what we've all confirmed is going to happen here today.
So Mr. Chair, point of order, please, point of order. If we're already doing that, why do we need to amend the motion to say that? It's already happening.
I agree. I think it's pretty innocuous, but I don't think we should care one way or the other, to tell you the truth.
It's just the current motion says as part of the 2022 budget, which is not accurate. So I'm just trying to make it accurate to say the report's going to come forward and... No, sorry, I just want to clarify the points here.
So to clarify, Councilor Menard, this is a policy request. We were asking staff to develop a policy, not a budget request. So the policy document would come back sometime in 2021, which was always the plan, because the 2022 budget will be debated in September or October of 2021. And so Councilor Menard's amendment has no real effect, but I don't care if it passes one way or the other.
So is that friendly?
Friendly, okay. So a policy report in 2021 and budget consideration for the 2022 budget. Okay. Councillor, we're really kind of, are you speaking to the amendment?
I just want to...
agree on it.
Yeah.
Why do we
So
not speak about it?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone is okay with the councilor's report? Sure. Carried. Thank you very much. Teresa's, the main councilor's report. Yeah. Okay, and so just because I haven't read it out, but we've spent a lot of time talking about it already, I'll read my motion out. Whereas the City of Ottawa continues to experience growth in the number of roads, sidewalks, bike lanes, and other public infrastructure it maintains, and whereas road services must ensure it consistently applies an approach to meet the expectations and needs of residents across the city, and whereas the 2018-2019 winter season presented extreme conditions with 287 centimeters of snow and over 85 hours of freezing rain and 45 rapid freeze-thaw cycles, and where it was further compounded by back-to-back snowfalls of over 25 centimeters, leading to unprecedented buildup of ice on sidewalks and residential roads, which caused severe rutting of roads and ice-coated sidewalks. And whereas residents and councillors have highlighted concerns with the current operational approaches and identified a need for more consistent service delivery across the city, and whereas staff recognize the need to improve service delivery in advance of refreshing the current maintenance quality standards, therefore be resolved that the Transportation Committee directs staff to conduct a service delivery review of winter operations, including consistency of service across the city, and report back to the committee with their findings ahead of the 1920 winter season. Is carried?
Carried.
Carried. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Councillor Leeper's motion is next.
Thank you, Chair. So we've already received the waiver to have this on the agenda. This is with respect to bike sharing and our rights-of-ways. Whereas the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development does not have within the delegation of authority bylaw the ability to enter into agreements to permit bike sharing services, where a cyclist pays for the rental of a bike from a station often located in the right-of-way, and whereas bike sharing promotes the goals of the City of Ottawa's cycling strategy, and whereas city staff have been monitoring the regulation of bike sharing internationally to gain a better understanding about the business model and how other cities are adapting to an evolving industry, and whereas in 2018 the City of Ottawa successfully piloted an agreement to locate dockless bike sharing stations on city right-of-way and city property to ensure compliance with the maintenance and liability provisions of the encroachment bylaw, and subject to concurrence with legal services, and whereas a holistic review of bike sharing and bike parking will begin in 2019 as part of the development of a bike parking strategy for the City of Ottawa, and whereas the National Capital Commission and City of Gatineau are also reviewing bike sharing agreements and have expressed an interest in developing a consistent approach for the region, and whereas the vendors will be responsible for installing, maintaining, and removing bikes and dockless stations, and whereas the potential location of the sites shall be reviewed by city staff to ensure all operational and technical approvals are in place, as well as the ward councillor, therefore be it resolved that the Transportation Committee recommend that Council waive the requirements of the encroachment bylaw to permit the manager of right-of-way, Heritage and Urban Design to enter into pilot agreements for 2019 to locate bike sharing stations on city right-of-way and city property sites to ensure the compliance with the maintenance and liability provisions of the encroachment bylaw and subject to concurrence with legal services. And be it further resolved that the Transportation Committee recommend to Council that the normal encroachment fees be reduced to $250 per year per station and $1 per bike per month in consideration of fees paid for comparable cycling infrastructure on the right-of-way, and be it further resolved that should the Province of Ontario permit the legal operation of electric scooters on public roadways, that city staff study the regulation of electric scooter sharing and parking as part of the aforementioned bike parking strategy and extend the bike sharing pilot provisions to electric scooter sharing companies as well for 2019.
Carried? Carried. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Councillor Menard has a motion as well.
Thanks very much, Chair. So just start with the be it resolved that the Transportation Committee approve the addition of this item for consideration of the committee at today's meeting, pursuant to subsection 89(3) of the procedure bylaw to expedite the process to install more bike racks in 2019. Whereas one of the objectives of the city's municipal parking management strategy is to promote, establish, and maintain programs and facilities that encourage the use of alternative modes of transportation, including cycling. And whereas the MPMS directs that all parking revenues generated are sufficient to cover all related operating and life cycle maintenance expenditures and contributing to the Parking Reserve Fund for capital projects. And whereas ring and post bicycle parking funded through the PRF has only been installed within paid parking areas in accordance with the MPMS objective of financial self-sustainability. And whereas the installation of sufficient high-quality bicycle parking at OC Transpo bus stops throughout the city, both within and outside of paid parking areas, will encourage transit ridership and cycling by facilitating multimodal use. And whereas staff began a pilot project in 2018 by starting the installation of ring and post bicycle parking at 50 OC Transpo bus stops within the existing budgets, and whereas staff believes that ring and post bicycle parking could be installed at an additional 50 OC Transpo bus stops in 2019 within existing budgets and without having a negative impact on the annual program, on the understanding that any additional funds that may be required would be provided from the Parking Reserve Fund to an upset limit of $30,000. And whereas if approved, staff will prioritize the locations for installation based on input from transit ridership statistics, staff observations, customer feedback, and input from the online survey for cyclists conducted in 2018. And whereas the locations for installation will also consider the availability of space at bus stops so as not to impede transit patrons, restrict accessibility, or interfere with operations or maintenance. Therefore, be it resolved that Transportation Committee recommend that City Council waive the requirements of the city's municipal parking management strategy to install bike racks only in paid parking areas and extend the pilot project for 2019 to install bike racks at up to an additional 50 OC Transpo bus stops, both within and outside paid parking areas, as described in this motion, to be funded from within the existing parking operations budget, on the understanding that any additional funds required will be transferred from the Parking Reserve Fund to an upset limit of $30,000. I just wanted to thank Councillor Eglai, who previously brought this motion forward last year, and for staff for their consultation on this.
Great. And staff are supportive?
Correct, Chair.
Okay. Is this item carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Do we have any other business? Any inquiries, notices of motion? Seeing none. On adjournment, is that carried? Carried? Yes, thank you. Next meeting is the 1st of May. Thank you very much.